When Elena Ward rode into that cattle ranch with nothing but $12 and a teaching certificate nobody wanted, she thought she'd hit rock bottom. She was wrong. Rock bottom was watching a 1,000-pound steer gore the only man who'd ever believed in her, while 12 illiterate cowboys stood frozen, and she had to choose between her pride and his life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all started, to the day desperation made her climb onto a stranger's wagon and ride toward a future that would nearly kill them both. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far Elena's story travels. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, throwing Elena Ward forward hard enough that her forehead smacked the wooden seat in front of her. She tasted copper. When she pulled back, there was a small red smear on the worn wood, and the businessman sitting across from her looked away quickly, as if her blood might be contagious. "Cripple Creek," the driver shouted. "End of the line!" Elena pressed her handkerchief to her lip and gathered her carpet bag, the only luggage she had left after selling everything else to afford the ticket west. Through the dusty window, she could see the town that was supposed to be her salvation. A crooked main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a saloon on every corner, and more horses than people. It looked exactly like the kind of place that ate women like her alive. She stepped down onto the street, and the smell hit her first: horse manure, coal smoke, and something else she couldn't identify but that made her stomach turn. A group of men loitering outside the nearest saloon went quiet, watching her with the kind of interest that made her skin crawl. Elena straightened her spine and walked toward the building with Cripple Creek School District painted on a crooked sign. Her teaching certificate was folded in her pocket, creased from being opened and closed too many times during the 3-week journey from Boston. The office was a single room that smelled like tobacco and mildew. Behind a desk sat a man with mutton chops that connected to his mustache in a way that suggested he'd never seen his own chin. "Help you?" he asked without looking up from his newspaper. "I'm here about the teaching position." Elena placed her certificate on the desk. "Elena Ward. I sent a letter 3 months ago." He glanced at the certificate, then at her, then back at the certificate like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "You're a woman." An astute observation. His face reddened. "The position's been filled." "Your advertisement said..." "Filled," he repeated, sliding her certificate back across the desk like it was contaminated. "We hired a man last week, fellow from Denver with excellent references." Elena picked up the certificate with fingers that wanted to shake but wouldn't. Not yet. Not in front of him. "I have references. Graduated top of my class at "I'm sure you did." He returned to his newspaper. "But this is a frontier town, Miss Ward. We need someone who can handle rough boys, keep order, not some Boston lady who'll faint the first time a student tracks mud across her classroom." "I've never fainted in my life." "Good for you. Doors behind you." She should have left, should have walked out with what remained of her dignity. Instead, she heard herself say, "I traveled 2,000 miles for this position." "Then you wasted your time and money." He turned a page. "My advice? Head back east on the next stage. Frontier's no place for women on their own." Elena walked out before she could say something that would make everything worse. The sun was setting, painting the crooked street in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful if she'd had any capacity left for beauty. She had $12 in her purse. The cheapest boarding house she'd passed charged $15 a week. The next stage east didn't leave for 6 days. By the end of the first day, Elena had knocked on 11 doors. By the end of the week, that number was 17. The mercantile didn't need a clerk. The hotel didn't need a maid. The restaurant didn't need a cook. The laundry didn't need anyone who wasn't Chinese, and the dressmaker took one look at Elena's threadbare traveling dress and suggested she might want to apply somewhere else. "There's always the lucky dollar," one woman finally told her, not unkindly. She was standing in the doorway of a boarding house Elena couldn't afford, flour dusting her apron. "They're always looking for girls." "I'm a teacher." "Out here, honey, you're whatever pays the bills." Elena walked away before the woman could see her face crack. She was down to $8 now. She'd been rationing food, skipping meals, drinking water from the public pump to stretch what little she had. At night, she slept in the stagecoach station, curled up on a bench in the corner where the ticket agent pretended not to see her. On the seventh day, she sat on that bench and opened her carpet bag to take inventory. 2 dresses, both showing wear. 1 spare set of undergarments. A hairbrush missing half its bristles. 3 books. Shakespeare, Whitman, a grammar primer, that she'd refused to sell even when she was starving. Her teaching certificate, now so creased it barely unfolded, and at the bottom, wrapped in a handkerchief, her mother's cameo brooch, the last thing she had of any value. Elena held it up to the lamplight. Her mother had worn it every day of her life, right up until the fever took her. Her father had pressed it into Elena's hand at the funeral and told her to take care of herself because he sure as hell wasn't going to. He'd been drunk. He was always drunk. She could pawn the brooch, might get enough for a ticket east if she was lucky. But east meant going back to Boston, to her father's house, to a city full of schools that had all given her the same answer. We don't hire women for anything except primary grades, and those positions are filled. East meant admitting defeat. Elena wrapped the brooch back up and shoved it to the bottom of her bag. The 18th door belonged to the Rocky Mountain Supply Company, a sprawling warehouse on the edge of town that sold everything from nails to knockoff patent medicine. The owner was a barrel-chested man named Morrison who looked at Elena's teaching certificate and actually laughed. "What the hell am I supposed to do with this?" he asked, waving it like a flag. "I need someone who can lift crates and drive a wagon, not diagram sentences." "I can lift crates?" "You weigh about as much as a sack of flour, sweetheart." "I'm stronger than I look." He studied her for a long moment, and Elena knew what he was seeing. A skinny woman in a dress that had been mended too many times, with circles under her eyes and desperation coming off her in waves. "Tell you what," Morrison said finally, "I got a cousin who runs a cattle ranch about 20 miles north, always complaining he can't find decent help. Maybe he could use someone who can read and write, keep his books straight or some such. Want me to send word?" Elena's throat was so tight she could barely get the words out. "Yes, please." Morrison shrugged. "Can't promise nothing. Lucas is particular about who he hires, but I'll mention you came through educated and looking for work." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." "Won't." 3 days later, Elena was down to $4 and sleeping in an actual bed, a lumpy, flea-infested disaster, in the cheapest boarding house in town, but still a bed. The landlady had agreed to let her pay what she could now and the rest later, though the look in her eyes said she didn't expect to see the rest. Elena was trying to figure out how to spin $4 into 14 when someone knocked on her door. "Lady downstairs to see you," the landlady's daughter called through the wood. Elena found a woman waiting in the parlor, tall, weather-beaten, wearing men's trousers, an expression that suggested she didn't suffer fools. She looked Elena up and down like she was evaluating livestock. "You Elena Ward?" "Yes." "Morrison sent word about you. Said you're educated, looking for work, and desperate enough to consider ranch life." Elena's face burned, but she nodded. "Name's Clara Moss. I run the supply operation for the Twin Creek Ranch. Owner's name is Lucas Harding. He's looking for someone to teach his men to read and write." Elena blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me. Lucas has 12 men working for him. Most of them can't read past a first-grade level. Some can't read at all. He wants them educated so they stop getting cheated every time they hit town, and so they can actually understand the damn contracts they're signing." Clara's mouth twitched. "You interested or not?" Yes, absolutely. Pays $30 a month plus room and board. You'll teach evenings after the men finish their work. Sundays off. Lucas don't tolerate drinking, fighting, or stupidity, and he'll expect the same from you." $30. Elena's knees went weak. "When do I start?" "Now, if you can be ready in 20 minutes. Got a supply wagon heading back to the ranch this morning." Elena was packed in 10. The wagon was loaded with flour, salt, coffee, and a dozen other supplies Clara rattled off like she was reading a shopping list. Elena sat up front next to a driver who introduced himself as Pete and then didn't say another word for the first hour. The town disappeared behind them, replaced by rolling grassland that stretched to the horizon. Mountains rose in the distance, still capped with snow despite it being late spring. The sky was bigger than anything Elena had ever seen, vast and blue and empty. "Never been west before, have you?" Pete finally asked. "Is it that obvious?" You keep staring at everything like it might bite you. Will it? He grinned, showing 3 missing teeth. Probably. The ranch appeared gradually. First the fences, then the outbuildings, then the main house, a sprawling 2-story structure that looked like it had been added onto multiple times without any coherent plan. Beyond it were barns, corrals, and a bunkhouse that had definitely seen better days. Men were everywhere, mending fences, working horses, hauling water. They all stopped to watch the wagon roll in, and Elena felt a dozen pairs of eyes lock onto her. Clara hopped down before the wagon fully stopped. Lucas should be in the house. Pete, get her bags. Elena climbed down on shaking legs and followed Clara across a yard that was part dirt, part mud, and part something she was trying not to identify. The house was better on the inside, clean at least, with furniture that looked handmade but solid. Clara led her to a small office where a man sat behind a desk covered in papers. Lucas Harding looked up, and Elena's first thought was that he didn't match his name. Lucas sounded friendly, approachable. This man was neither. He was tall, she could tell even sitting down, with dark hair going gray at the temples and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and trusted too little. "This is Elena Ward," Clara said, the teacher Morrison mentioned. Lucas stood, and Elena had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He had to be 6'3" at least, with shoulders that suggested he did actual work instead of just directing it. "Miss Ward." His voice was rough, like gravel. Clara explained the position. She did. "You understand what you're getting into? These aren't schoolboys. They're grown men, most of them rough, all of them stubborn. Some of them won't want to learn, won't see the point." "I understand." "You ever taught before?" Elena hesitated. She could lie, say yes, but something about Lucas Harding's steady gaze made lying seem impossible. "No. I graduated with a teaching certificate, but no school would hire me because I'm a woman. This would be my first position." "Honest, at least." Lucas leaned back against his desk. "I'll be straight with you, Miss Ward. I need someone who can handle herself, who won't run at the first sign of trouble. Ranch life is hard. My men are harder. You think you can do this?" Every rational part of Elena's brain was screaming at her to ask more questions, to negotiate, to at least see the living quarters before agreeing. But the part of her that had knocked on 17 doors and slept on a bench in a stagecoach station, the part that was down to $4 and running out of time, that part spoke first. "Yes," she said, "I can do this." Lucas studied her for another long moment, then nodded once. "You start tomorrow. Clara will show you to your room." The room was in the main house, a small space under the eaves with a slanted ceiling, a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the ranch. It was the nicest place Elena had slept in weeks. Clara dropped her carpet bag on the bed. "Supper's at 6. You'll eat with Lucas in the main house. The men eat in the bunkhouse. Don't go over there unless Lucas or I are with you, understand?" "Why not?" "Because some of those men haven't seen a woman in months, and I don't trust all of them to behave themselves." Clara's expression was flat. "You need to understand something, Elena. This ranch runs on respect. Lucas has it because he's earned it. You don't have it yet, and some of those men won't give it to you just because Lucas says so. You'll have to earn it yourself." "How?" "That's your problem to solve." Clara moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. Lucas is a good man, fair man, but he doesn't suffer fools, and he doesn't make allowances. You mess up, you're gone. You understand?" Elena nodded, even though her stomach was churning. "Good. Wash up and come down for supper. You look like you need a decent meal." Supper was beef stew, fresh bread, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. Lucas didn't say much, but he listened while Elena tried to make conversation and failed miserably. Every topic she raised, the weather, the ranch, the men, died after 2 or 3 exchanges. Finally, she gave up and just ate. The stew was the best thing she'd tasted in weeks, and she had to force herself not to shovel it in like a starving dog. "Clara says you're from Boston," Lucas said eventually. "Yes." "Long way to come for a teaching job." "There weren't any jobs in Boston, not for women." Elena set down her spoon. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why do you want your men educated? Most ranch owners wouldn't care." Lucas was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee mug in his hands. Lost a good man last year, signed a contract he couldn't read, ended up owing more than he'd make in 5 years. Shot himself rather than face the debt. He looked up and his eyes were hard. Could have been prevented if he'd known what he was signing. I won't have that happen again. Elena felt something shift in her chest. I'll do my best. That's all I'm asking. Nub. Her first class was scheduled for the next evening, after the men finished their work. Clara had set up a makeshift classroom in the barn, a clear space with benches, a chalkboard that had definitely seen better days, and lanterns for light. Elena arrived early, her arms full of the few teaching materials she'd brought with her. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the chalk. She'd never taught a class before, had never even stood in front of students. Every terrible possibility ran through her mind on a loop. They'd laugh at her, ignore her, walk out. She'd fail on the first day, and Lucas would send her back to town with nothing. The men started arriving in groups of 2 and 3, tracking mud and manure across the barn floor. They were exactly what Clara had described, rough, weathered, ranging in age from barely 20 to well past 50. None of them looked happy to be there. Elena counted 12 men total. Not one of them sat down. Gentlemen, she started, and her voice came out too high. She cleared her throat and tried again. My name is Elena Ward. Mr. Harding has hired me to help you improve your reading and writing skills. Silence. A few of them exchanged glances. One man stepped forward, big, broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. Name's Garrett. I'm foreman here. He looked her up and down. No offense, lady, but this is horseshit. We got real work to do, and Lucas wants us sitting in a barn learning ABCs like we're kids? A few men laughed. Elena's face burned, but she held her ground. Can you read a contract, Mr. Garrett? His jaw tightened. I know enough. Do you? Can you read every word, understand every clause, or do you just sign where someone points and hope they're being honest? The laughter died. Garrett's face went red, but he didn't answer. Elena turned to address all of them. I'm not here to treat you like children. I'm here because Mr. Harding believes you deserve better than being cheated by men who can read better than you can. You want to keep getting taken advantage of every time you hit town? That's your choice. But if you want to protect yourselves, protect your money, maybe even advance beyond manual labor, you'll sit down and give this a chance. Another long silence. Then an older man, gray-haired, thin, with kind eyes, pulled up a bench and sat. Hell with it, he said. I'm tired of getting robbed. One by one, the others sat. Garrett was the last, dropping onto a bench in the back with his arms crossed, like he was daring her to make this worth his time. Elena picked up the chalk with trembling fingers and wrote her name on the board. Let's start with introductions, she said. I want to know each of your names and what you hope to get out of these lessons. The first week was a disaster. Half the men couldn't write their own names. A quarter couldn't identify all the letters. 2 admitted they couldn't read at all, and she could see the shame in their faces when they said it. She tried the methods she'd learned in school, phonics, rote memorization, structured lessons, and watched them bounce off the men like water off rock. They fidgeted, argued, got frustrated, and walked out. Garrett made a comment under his breath every time she turned to the board. Another man fell asleep twice. At the end of the 4th lesson, only 6 men showed up. Elena walked back to the main house feeling like she'd swallowed glass. She found Lucas in his office, doing paperwork by lamplight. Half your men didn't come to class tonight, she said without preamble. Lucas looked up. I know. Aren't you going to do something? Order them to attend. That's not how it works, Miss Ward. I can encourage them, but I can't force them to learn. That's your job. He set down his pen. You having trouble? Everything in Elena wanted to lie. To say it was fine. She had it under control. But she was so tired of pretending. Yes, she admitted. Nothing I try is working. They're bored, frustrated, and I don't blame them. The methods I know are designed for children, not grown men who've spent their entire lives working with their hands. So adapt. I don't know how. Lucas studied her for a long moment. You know why I hired you, Miss Ward? Because I was desperate and cheap? His mouth twitched. Because when Clara told me about you, she said you'd knocked on 17 doors looking for work and didn't quit. That tells me you don't give up easy. He leaned forward. Figure out what they need to learn and why they need to learn it. Make it practical. Make it matter. They'll show up. Elena left his office with her mind racing. Pulsing. The next day, she didn't prepare a lesson. Instead, she asked Clara to introduce her to the men during their lunch break. She found them sitting in the shade of the barn, eating beans and bread. When she approached, several of them stood up out of what might have been politeness or might have been wariness. I need help, Elena said bluntly. The lessons aren't working, and I know it. So I want to ask you directly, what do you actually need to know? Not what I think you should learn, but what would make your lives easier, better, more profitable. They stared at her like she'd grown a second head. The old man who'd sat down first, his name was Henry, finally spoke up. Can you teach us how to tell when someone's lying on a bill of sale? Yes. How to write a letter so it don't sound stupid? Yes. Garrett uncrossed his arms. How to read a goddamn map so I don't get lost every time Lucas sends me to a new pasture? Elena smiled. Absolutely. The next lesson, she brought a stack of actual contracts, bills of sale, and property deeds that Clara had scrounged up. She put them on the table and said, We're going to learn to read by reading things that actually matter to you. They worked through a bill of sale, line by line, and Elena watched something shift in the room. The men leaned in, asked questions, pointed out words they didn't recognize. When she showed them how one contract had a clause that would have cheated them out of a month's wages, Garrett actually laughed. Son of a bitch, he said. I signed one of those last year. Not anymore, Elena told him. Attendance went back up. Then it climbed higher. Men who'd never shown up before started appearing, drawn by stories from the others. They brought their own contracts, their own questions. Elena started bringing in newspapers and asking them what stories they wanted to understand. She had them practice writing by drafting letters home, job applications, even wanted ads. Every lesson was tied to something real, something they could use tomorrow. And slowly, painfully slowly, they got better. Henry learned to write his full name instead of just an X. A young cowboy named Billy started reading the newspaper to the others every morning. Garrett stopped making comments under his breath and started staying after class to ask questions. One night, a quiet man named Thomas raised his hand. Miss Ward, I got a question. Go ahead. How do you spell respect? She wrote it on the board. R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Why? Because I want to write a letter to my daughter, and I want to tell her I learned it. His voice cracked. She's 12. Reads better than I do. I want her to know I'm trying. The room went silent. Elena's throat was tight. That's a good reason, Thomas. 6 weeks in, Lucas asked Elena to join him in his office after supper. I've been watching your classes, he said without preamble. Elena's stomach dropped. Is there a problem? Opposite. The men are actually learning. More importantly, they're showing up. He pulled out a ledger. I need someone to help me with the ranch accounts. Previous woman I hired quit last month, couldn't handle the mess. You interested? Elena blinked. You want me to keep books? Unless you can't do math. I can do math. Good. I'll pay you an extra $10 a month. $40 total. Elena had to sit down before her knees gave out. The ranch's financial records were a nightmare. Disorganized, incomplete, with some entries that made no sense at all. Elena spent 3 full days just sorting through papers, creating a system, tracking down missing invoices. She found discrepancies immediately, small ones at first, a few dollars here and there that didn't add up. Then bigger ones. Supplies that were paid for but never delivered, bills for services that were never rendered. She brought it to Lucas on the 4th day, laying out the evidence in neat columns. He looked at the numbers for a long time, his jaw tight. How much total? Over $300 in the last 6 months alone. Who? Your previous supplier, the one Clara replaced. Lucas stood and walked to the window, his hands clenched behind his back. I trusted him. I'm sorry. Don't be. You just saved me from losing a lot more. He turned back to her. Fix it. Organize everything. I want a clear picture of where this ranch stands financially. Elena worked late into the night for the next 2 weeks, rebuilding the ranch's accounts from scratch. She created ledgers, filed invoices, tracked every penny. The numbers started to make sense, and with them, she started to see the ranch's potential. Lucas was sitting on assets he didn't know he had. Land that could be better utilized, contracts that could be renegotiated, opportunities he was missing because he couldn't see the full picture. She brought him a report, 5 pages of analysis and recommendations. He read it twice without speaking. "This is good work, Miss Ward." "Thank you." "How'd you learn to do this?" "My father ran a business into the ground through bad accounting. I learned by watching his mistakes." She hesitated. "These recommendations, they're just suggestions. You don't have to—" "I'll implement them," Lucas said. "All of them. Spring turned to summer, and Elena found herself settling into a rhythm she'd never expected. Mornings were for bookkeeping, afternoons for preparing lessons, evenings for teaching. Sundays she spent reading in her room or helping Clara with supply inventories. The men's progress was visible now. They wrote letters, read newspapers, challenged each other to spelling contests. Garrett had started keeping a journal. Henry was teaching his grandson to read using the same methods Elena had taught him. Billy had applied for a better job in town and got it based on a letter of reference he'd written himself. And Elena felt something she hadn't felt in years: useful. But she was also aware of the way Lucas watched her sometimes, not with the wariness he'd shown at first, but with something else she couldn't quite define. They ate supper together most nights now, and the silences had shifted from uncomfortable to companionable. Sometimes they talked about the ranch, sometimes about the men's progress, sometimes about nothing at all. She was careful not to read too much into it. Lucas was her employer. This was a job. Getting ideas beyond that was a recipe for disaster. But when he smiled at something she said, rare but genuine when it happened, she felt it in her chest like a physical thing. She was in trouble, and she knew it. The trouble came from a different direction than she expected. On a humid evening in late July, Elena was teaching a lesson on contract law when Garrett interrupted. "Miss Ward, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How come you ended up here? You're educated, smart. Why aren't you teaching in a real school?" The room went quiet. Elena set down her chalk carefully. "Because real schools don't hire women for anything beyond teaching small children how to color inside the lines," she said. "I applied to 43 schools in Boston. Every single one told me they only hire men for upper-level positions. A few suggested I get married and let my husband handle my career ambitions." "That's bullshit," Billy said. "Yes, it is, but it's also reality." "So you came out here because you had no other choice," Garrett said. Elena met his eyes. "I came out here because I was desperate, broke, and out of options. But I stayed because for the first time in my life I'm doing work that matters, work that's mine. You can judge me for that if you want." Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I ain't judging you. I'm saying you got more guts than most men I know." The other men murmured agreement, and Elena had to turn back to the board before they could see her face. That night, she couldn't sleep. The conversation had shaken something loose in her, all the anger and frustration she'd been pushing down for months, years maybe. She got up and walked downstairs, thinking she'd make tea. She found Lucas in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a glass of whiskey. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Apparently not." He pushed out a chair with his foot. "Sit. Want a drink?" "I don't drink." "Neither do I, usually." He took a sip. "Bad day." Elena sat. "What happened?" "Lost a contract to a ranch down south. They underbid me by 10%. He rotated the glass in his hands. "I'll be fine. Just frustrating." They sat in silence for a while. Then Elena heard herself say, "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why did you really hire me?" Lucas looked at her with those steady, unreadable eyes. "I told you, you don't quit." "That's not a reason to hire a teacher." "It is if you need someone who'll stick around when things get hard." He set down his glass. "You want the truth? I've had 3 teachers before you. First one lasted 2 days, second one made it a week before a fight broke out in class and he ran. Third one quit because she said the men were impossible to teach. His mouth twisted. But you're still here, and the men are actually learning, so I'd say I hired the right person. Elena felt something warm spread through her chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Summer's the easy part. Winter out here will test you in ways you can't imagine. I'm not going anywhere, Mr. Harding. Lucas, he said. You've been here 3 months. You can call me Lucas. Only if you call me Elena. He nodded once, and something passed between them in the lamplight. An understanding, maybe, or the beginning of one. Elena went back to bed feeling like something had shifted, though she couldn't say exactly what. August brought heat that made the barn feel like an oven during lessons. Elena moved classes outside under the cottonwood trees, and the men sprawled on the grass like overgrown schoolboys while she taught them grammar using the clouds for inspiration. The ranch was thriving. Lucas had implemented every one of her recommendations, and the results were showing. New contracts, better prices, improved efficiency. He'd started asking her opinion on business decisions, and more than once her suggestions had saved him money. The men's education had advanced beyond basics. Several were now reading full books. Thomas had taught 2 of the younger hands to read using Elena's methods. Garrett had started writing a memoir about his years as a cowboy, and his spelling was almost readable. Elena wrote letters to her old classmates back east, telling them about her work. Most didn't write back. One who did said it sounded terribly rugged and suggested Elena come home before she went native. Elena burned that letter and didn't reply. She was happy. For the first time in her adult life, she was genuinely, thoroughly happy. Which is, of course, when everything went to hell. The trouble started with a man named Donovan. He rode in on a Tuesday morning in early September, trailing 3 pack horses and wearing a suit that had no business being on a cattle ranch. Elena was in the barn organizing textbooks when she heard the commotion outside. Men shouting, horses neighing, and then Lucas's voice cutting through it all like a blade. You've got some nerve showing your face here. Elena moved to the doorway. In the yard, Lucas stood with his arms crossed while the stranger dismounted. The man was tall, well-fed, with oil-slicked hair and a smile that made Elena's skin crawl. Now, Lucas, is that any way to greet an old friend? Donovan's voice was smooth, practiced. I come bearing good news, and you act like I'm here to steal your cattle. Last time you were here, you tried to buy my land for half what it's worth. Time before that, you sold me feed that was half sawdust. So yeah, I'm wondering what you're trying to steal this time. Donovan laughed like Lucas had made a joke. His eyes swept the ranch and landed on Elena. Well, you finally got yourself a woman. Didn't think you had it in you. She's my bookkeeper and teacher, Lucas said flatly, and none of your business. Everything on this ranch is my business, friend, especially now that I own the water rights to Copper Creek. The color drained from Lucas's face. The hell you do? Bought them last month from the county, fair and square. Donovan pulled a paper from his jacket. All legal, which means every drop of water flowing through your property now belongs to me, and I'm willing to let you use it, for a price. Elena watched Lucas's hands curl into fists. Around the yard, the ranch hands had stopped working, watching the exchange with expressions ranging from anger to fear. How much? Lucas asked, his voice dangerously quiet. $500 per year. That's robbery. That's business. Donovan folded the paper and tucked it back in his jacket. You got until the end of the month to decide. Pay up, or I cut off your water access. Your cattle can drink from the public creek 10 miles south. He smiled. Of course, moving a herd that far twice a day would be mighty inconvenient. Lucas took a step forward. Donovan's hand moved to his hip, where a pistol sat in a leather holster. Careful now, Donovan said softly. Wouldn't want to do something you'd regret. For a long, terrible moment, Elena thought Lucas might hit him anyway. Then Lucas stepped back, his jaw so tight she could see the muscle jumping. Get off my property. I'll be back in 3 weeks for your answer. Donovan mounted his horse, tipped his hat to Elena with that oily smile, and rode off trailing his pack animals behind him. The silence he left behind felt like a held breath. Lucas stood in the yard, staring at nothing. Then he turned and walked toward the house without a word to anyone, Elena found him an hour later in his office, paper spread across his desk. He didn't look up when she entered. "How bad is it?" she asked. "Bad." He shoved a ledger toward her. "We don't have $500. We've got operating costs, payroll, loan payments. Even if I could scrape together that much, it would cripple us. We'd have to let men go, cut back on everything." Elena pulled up a chair and started reading through the numbers. Lucas was right. The ranch was doing well, but they weren't sitting on piles of cash. Most of the money was tied up in cattle, equipment, land improvements. Can you fight it? Challenge his claim to the water rights? Maybe. Would take a lawyer, probably months in court. More money we don't have. Lucas rubbed his face. "I should have seen this coming. Donovan's been trying to squeeze me out for years. He wants this land, figures if he makes it impossible for me to operate, I'll have to sell. And if you don't pay? Then we lose access to the only reliable water source for 20 miles. The cattle would die. The ranch would die." He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw fear in his eyes. Everything I've built would be gone. Elena studied the ledger, her mind racing through possibilities. What if we renegotiate the bank loan, or find additional buyers for the cattle? Already thought of that. Bank won't budge, and cattle prices are down. I've been over these numbers 100 times. There's no magic solution. Then we find a non-magic one. Elena pulled the ledger closer. "Give me 2 days. Let me go through everything again. There has to be something we're missing." Lucas looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he just nodded. 2 days. Elena didn't sleep that night. She went through every page of the ranch's financial records, every contract, every receipt. She made lists, ran calculations, looked for any asset that could be liquidated, or any cost that could be cut. By morning, she had a headache and 3 possible solutions, none of them good. She found Lucas in the barn, mucking out stalls alongside his men. He looked surprised to see her. "You look like hell," he said. "I feel worse." She held out her notes. "I have some ideas. You're not going to like them." They walked back to the house, and Elena laid out her analysis. Option 1. Sell off part of the herd at a loss to raise quick cash. Option 2. Take out a second mortgage on the property. Option 3. Try to find investors willing to buy into the ranch in exchange for a share of future profits. Lucas listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "The herd sale would hurt us long term," he said finally. "We'd be undercutting our own future earnings. The mortgage, banks are already nervous about ranch loans after last year's drought. And investors," he shook his head, "I'd be giving up control of my own land. I know, but these are the only options I can see that don't involve just rolling over for Donovan." "There's one more option." Lucas met her eyes. "I could sell, take whatever Donovan's willing to pay, cut my losses, and walk away." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. "You can't be serious." "Why not? I'm 42 years old, tired as hell, and one bad deal away from losing everything anyway. Maybe it's time to accept reality." "Reality?" Elena stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "Reality is that you've built something here. You've given 12 men jobs, taught them their worth, created something that matters, and you're going to throw it away because some snake in a suit wants to squeeze you? It's not that simple." "It absolutely is that simple." She was aware she was yelling, aware this was unprofessional, but she couldn't stop. "You told me not to quit when teaching got hard. You said figure it out, make it work. And now at the first real problem, you're just going to give up?" Lucas stood up too, his face flushing. "This isn't the first real problem, Elena. This is the latest in a long line of problems that never end. Drought, disease, market crashes, men getting hurt or killed, and now this. I'm tired of fighting." "Then you're not the man I thought you were." The words came out harder than she meant them. Lucas's expression went flat, unreadable. "Get out," he said quietly. "Lucas, I said get out." Elena left before she could make it worse. She made it to her room, closed the door, and sat on the bed with her hands shaking. She'd crossed a line. She was his employee, not his partner, not his equal. She had no right to talk to him that way, no matter how she felt about the situation, no matter how she felt about him. Elena put her face in her hands and tried not to cry. A knock came an hour later. Elena opened the door expecting Clara, but found Henry standing there with his hat in his hands. "Begging your pardon, Miss Ward, but the men sent me to talk to you." "About what?" "About what's happening with the ranch. Lucas told us this morning about Donovan and the water rights. We know things are bad." Henry twisted his hat. "We also know you've been helping with the books, making things better. So we wanted to ask, is there anything we can do?" Elena's throat tightened. "I don't know, Henry. The situation is complicated." "Most things worth doing are." He met her eyes. "We ain't stupid, Miss Ward. We know Lucas hired you to teach us because he wanted better for us. And you did that. Hell, half of us can read a newspaper now, write a decent letter. That matters. This ranch matters. So if there's anything we can do to help save it, we want to know." An idea hit Elena so suddenly she had to sit down. "Henry, how many of the men have money saved?" "Most of us got something put by. Not much, but something. Why?" "Because maybe we don't need investors from outside. Maybe we already have them." Henry's eyes widened. "You mean us?" "I mean, what if the men pooled their savings and bought a stake in the ranch? Not control, Lucas would still run everything, but enough to raise the cash we need for Donovan, with the agreement that everyone gets a share of future profits." "Make it our ranch, too," Henry said slowly. "Not just his." "Exactly. Some of the boys won't have much to contribute. Then they contribute less and get a smaller share. Or they contribute labor, extra work, improvements, whatever. The point is, everyone who wants in gets a chance to invest in their own future." Henry was quiet for a moment, turning it over. Then he smiled. "Miss Ward, you're either crazy or a genius." "Possibly both. But will you talk to the men? See what they think?" "I'll do better than that. I'll call a meeting tonight." Elena spent the afternoon drafting a proposal. She outlined how the investment would work, what percentage of the ranch each dollar would buy, how profits would be distributed. She made it as simple and clear as possible, because the men deserved to understand exactly what they'd be agreeing to. That evening, all 12 ranch hands crowded into the barn. Elena stood at the front with her proposal in her shaking hands. "Thank you for coming," she started. "I know Lucas talked to you about the situation with Donovan. What he probably didn't tell you is that we have options, but all of them are bad. Unless we try something different." She explained her idea: the employee investment, the shared ownership, the distribution of future profits. The men listened in silence. When she finished, Garrett spoke first. "How much would we need to raise total?" "500 for Donovan, plus another 200 cushion for operating costs. 700 total. And if we can't raise that much, then we fall short, and Lucas has to decide whether to make up the difference by selling cattle or taking out another loan." Billy raised his hand like he was still in class. "What happens if the ranch fails anyway? We lose our savings." "Yes," Elena said honestly. "That's the risk. You'd be investing in something with no guarantees, but you'd also be investing in yourselves, in your own future, in a place you helped build." The men looked at each other. Elena could see the doubt on some faces, the calculation on others. Thomas stood up. "I got $40 saved. It's everything I got, but I'll put it in. This ranch gave me a job when nobody else would. Seems fair to give something back." "I got 60, Henry said. "Count me in." One by one, the men started committing amounts. $20 here, 30 there. Garrett sat in the back with his arms crossed, not speaking. Finally, he stood. "This is stupid. We could lose everything." "We could," Elena agreed. "Lucas might say no anyway. Might not want our money." "He might." Garrett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I got 120 saved. Been planning to buy my own horse. But hell with it. I'll invest." By the end of the night, they'd pledged $630, more than they needed. Elena looked at the list of names and amounts and felt something fierce rise in her chest. "I need to talk to Lucas." "He's going to be pissed," Garrett warned. "Probably, but he'll get over it." She found Lucas in the stable brushing down his horse. He didn't look up when she approached. "I'm sorry," Elena said, "for what I said earlier. It was out of line." "It was the truth." Lucas kept brushing. "I was giving up, ready to quit. And now? Now I don't know what the hell to do." He finally looked at her. "I've been going over the numbers all day. trying to find a way that doesn't end in disaster. I can't see one. What if I told you there was a way? One you haven't considered? I'd say you're either brilliant or delusional. Elena handed him the list. Your men just pledged $630 to invest in the ranch in exchange for a small percentage of future profits. They want to be partners, not just employees. Lucas stared at the list like it was written in a foreign language. His hand was shaking slightly. They did this? His voice was rough. All of them? Every single one. Even the men who don't have much. Because they believe in what you're building here. Lucas sat down on a hay bale, still holding the list. He read through it twice, and when he looked up, his eyes were red. I can't take their money. If it fails, you'll all fail together. But if it succeeds, you'll all succeed together. Elena sat down next to him. This ranch isn't just yours anymore, Lucas. It hasn't been for a while. These men work here, learn here, build their lives here. Let them have a stake in it. You put them up to this. I proposed the idea. They made their own choices. Lucas was quiet for a long time, staring at the names. Then he said, You're either the smartest person I've ever met or the most reckless. Possibly both. He laughed, a short, surprised sound. When did you get so brave? I learned from someone stubborn. Their eyes met, and Elena felt that pull again, the same one she'd been ignoring for months. Lucas seemed to feel it too, because his expression shifted into something she couldn't quite read. Elena, he started. A shout from outside cut him off. They both jumped up and ran to the yard where Billy was pointing at the horizon. Fire, he yelled. In the north pasture, Lena could see it now, a line of orange against the darkening sky, spreading fast. Lucas was already running, shouting orders. Billy, ring the bell. Henry, get every man on a horse. We need to move the cattle south before the fire reaches them. The ranch exploded into controlled chaos. Men grabbed ropes, saddles, buckets. Elena stood frozen for a moment, then ran to help Clara prepare medical supplies. Burns were inevitable. You know how to ride? Clara asked. No? Then you're on water duty. Fill every bucket we have. The men are going to need it. Elena spent the next hour hauling water from the well until her arms screamed and her back felt like it might break. The sky glowed orange, and ash drifted down like snow. She could hear the cattle bellowing in the distance, smell the smoke thickening in the air. Lucas rode in twice to switch horses, his face black with soot. The second time, Elena grabbed his arm. How bad? Bad. Fire's moving faster than we can. If the wind shifts east, it could take the whole northern quarter. He pulled away. I have to go. He was gone before she could respond. The night dragged on forever. Men came and went, drinking water by the gallon, coughing up ash. One came back with burns on his hands that Elena wrapped while Clara directed. Another fell off his horse and limped in with a twisted ankle. Garrett rode in around midnight, his horse lathered and blowing. We got the cattle south, lost maybe 20 head that ran the wrong way. Lucas is still out there with Thomas and Billy, trying to create a fire break. In the dark? Elena asked. Fire don't care what time it is, ma'am. It was nearly dawn when Lucas finally rode back. He slid off his horse and nearly collapsed. Elena caught him, staggering under his weight. I'm fine, he muttered, but he wasn't. His face was blistered, his hands raw, and when he coughed it sounded like tearing fabric. You need a doctor. Need water and sleep. He let her guide him toward the house. The fire? Garrett said you created a fire break. Yeah, barely. He coughed again, harder. Lost the north pasture, fences are gone. Probably lost more cattle than we thought. They made it to the porch before his legs gave out. Elena helped him sit, then ran for water and bandages. When she came back, he was slumped against the post, eyes closed. She cleaned his burns as gently as she could, but he still flinched. His hands were the worst, blistered and bleeding from where he'd grabbed burning fence posts to throw them clear. You could have died out there, Elena said quietly. Cattle needed saving. The cattle aren't worth your life. Lucas opened his eyes. Those cattle are this ranch. This ranch is all I have. He caught her hand. Was all I had. Elena's breath caught. Lucas, let me say this before I lose my nerve. His grip tightened. I don't know when it happened. Somewhere between you walking into my office with $12 to your name and you standing up to me yesterday about not giving up. But somewhere in there, you became the most important thing in my life. And it scares the hell out of me. Elena's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Why does it scare you? Because I could lose you. I've lost everything else I cared about. My parents, my brother, good men who worked for me. I can't. He stopped, his voice breaking. I can't lose you too. You won't. You don't know that. Elena set down the bandages and took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. You're right. I don't know that. Nobody knows anything for certain. But I do know that I came out here with nothing. No money, no prospects, no future. And you gave me all of that. You gave me work that matters, respect, a place that feels like home. And somewhere in there, you gave me something else too. What? A reason to stay. Lucas kissed her then, sudden and desperate and tasting like ash and smoke. Elena kissed him back with 3 months of pent-up feeling, her hands tangling in his soot-covered hair. When they pulled apart, they were both shaking. This is a terrible idea, Lucas said. Probably the worst we've had. I'm your employer. You work for me. So fire me. He laughed against her mouth. Can't. You're the only person who understands my books. They kissed again, softer this time, and Elena felt something settle in her chest, a rightness she'd never felt before. A throat cleared behind them. They broke apart to find Clara standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, and an expression that might have been amusement. The men are asking for orders, she said, but if you two need a few more minutes to sort things out, I can tell them you're busy. Lucas's face went red. I know exactly what you were doing. About time, too. The betting pool was getting ridiculous. Clara's mouth twitched. Billy had money on November. He's going to be disappointed. There was a betting pool? Elena asked weakly. Honey, everyone on this ranch knew you two were circling each other. We were just waiting to see who broke first. Clara turned to Lucas. Now get yourself cleaned up and give the men their orders. We got a ranch to rebuild. She walked away, leaving them on the porch in the growing light. Lucas looked at Elena. This is going to complicate everything. I know. The men will talk. Let them. I don't know how to do this. Haven't courted a woman since I was 20. Elena smiled. Lucky for you, I've never been courted at all. We can figure it out together. Together, Lucas repeated like he was testing the word. Then he stood, pulling her up with him. I need to check on the men, assess the damage, but after, we'll figure out the rest. He kissed her once more, quick and fierce, then limped off toward the bunkhouse. Elena watched him go, her heart still racing, her lips still tingling. Behind her, Clara called out, Don't just stand there grinning like an idiot. We got work to do. Elena turned to find the older woman smiling despite her stern words. Is it that obvious? Elena asked. Honey, you're glowing brighter than that fire was. Now come help me inventory what we lost before Lucas tries to do it himself and passes out. The damage assessment took all day. They'd lost 30 head of cattle, half the north pasture fencing, and a storage shed that had caught an ember and burned to the ground. It could have been worse, much worse, but it was still a hit the ranch could barely afford. That evening, Lucas called a meeting with all the men. They gathered in the barn, exhausted and smoke-stained. I need to tell you something, Lucas said, about the money you pledged yesterday. Elena's stomach dropped. He was going to refuse it, going to try to handle everything alone like he always did. But instead, Lucas said, I accept every dollar. But I want to be clear about what that means. Starting today, this ranch belongs to all of us, not just me. We share the profits, but we also share the losses. What happened last night? That's our loss now, not just mine, you understand? The men nodded. Good, because we got a lot of work ahead of us. We need to rebuild that fence, clear the burned pasture, find the cattle that scattered, and in 3 weeks, we still got to deal with Donovan. Lucas's jaw tightened, but for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I'm facing it alone. You're not, Garrett said. We got your back, boss. All of us. The other men murmured agreement. Lucas nodded, his throat working. Then let's get to work. The next 2 weeks were brutal. They rebuilt fence in the heat, cleared charred timber, searched for scattered cattle. Every man worked until they could barely stand, then got up the next morning and did it again. And through it all, Elena watched Lucas transform. He consulted the men on decisions, listened to their ideas, treated them like the partners they now were. The ranch started to feel less like a dictatorship and more like a community. She and Lucas stole moments when they could, a conversation in the stable, a kiss in the office when no one was looking, a shared glance across the supper table that made her pulse race. They hadn't told the men officially, but Clara was right. Everyone knew. Billy cornered Elena one morning while she was gathering eggs. "Miss Ward, can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. I might not answer." "Are you and Lucas... are you two..." He trailed off, his face red. "Yes," Elena said simply. "Oh, good. Not good like it's my business, but good like you both seem happier. And we all like you, so it's good you're staying." "I'm not going anywhere, Billy." "Yeah, but before we thought you might leave when you got a better offer. Now we figure you got a reason to stay." Elena smiled. The best reason. When Donovan rode in on the promised day, he found a very different ranch than the one he'd left. The men stood in a line in front of the house, arms crossed, faces hard. Lucas stood at the center with Elena beside him. Donovan took in the scene and his smile faltered slightly. "Well, quite the welcome party." "We have your money," Lucas said. $500. "Here's the contract you'll sign saying this pays for 5 years of water access with rates locked in." He held out a document Elena had spent 2 days drafting and having reviewed by the one honest lawyer in town. Donovan's smile disappeared. That wasn't the deal. "It is now. You want the money? You sign. Otherwise, we'll see you in court, and my new partners here have made it clear they're willing to invest in legal fees." Donovan looked at the line of men, at Lucas's unyielding expression, at Elena standing her ground beside him. His hand twitched toward his gun, then stopped. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Maybe, but it's our mistake to make." Lucas didn't blink. "What's it going to be?" For a long moment, Elena thought Donovan might try something violent. Then he snatched the contract from Lucas's hand, read it over, and signed with angry slashes. 5 years, he said. "Then I own you." 5 years is a long time. A lot can change. Donovan took the money, mounted his horse, and rode off without another word. When he was gone, the men erupted in cheers. Garrett slapped Lucas on the back so hard he stumbled. Henry actually hugged Elena, lifting her off her feet. "We did it," Thomas kept saying. "We actually did it." That night they had a celebration. Nothing fancy, just extra food and the day off tomorrow. The men sat around a bonfire sharing stories, and Elena sat next to Lucas, his arm around her shoulders. "You know what the best part of today was?" Lucas said quietly. "What?" "When Donovan saw us standing together, saw that this place wasn't just mine anymore, that it belonged to all of us." He looked down at her. "Including you. I don't own any of the ranch. You own more of it than anyone. You saved it." He kissed her temple. "You saved me." Elena leaned into him, watching the fire and listening to the men laugh. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt like she'd found where she belonged, and she was never letting it go. The peace lasted exactly 3 weeks. October came in cold that year, bringing frost that killed the last of the garden and turned the morning grass white. Elena woke early most days now, not from necessity, but because she'd gotten used to the rhythm of ranch life. She liked the quiet before dawn, the way the sky turned from black to gray to gold, the sound of men stirring in the bunkhouse, and horses nickering for their morning feed. This particular morning, she was in the kitchen making coffee when Lucas came in from his dawn ride, his face drawn. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "Cattle are restless. Been that way since yesterday." He poured himself coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "Could be nothing. Could be a storm coming. Or it could be..." A shout from outside cut him off. Then another. Then the sound that made Elena's blood freeze, a rumbling like distant thunder, but deeper, more ominous. Lucas dropped his cup and ran. Elena followed him out to the porch and saw what hell looked like. The entire northern herd was running, not just moving, but running in a blind panic, 1,000 pounds of muscle and horn stampeding south toward the ranch buildings. The ground shook. Dust rose in a choking cloud. And in front of the herd, barely visible, were 3 men on horses trying desperately to turn them. "That's Billy and Thomas," Lucas said, his voice tight. "Who's the third?" Elena squinted through the dust. "I can't tell." Lucas was already moving, shouting for his horse. Men poured out of the bunkhouse, some still pulling on boots. Clara appeared with a rifle, her face grim. "How many cattle?" she asked. 200, maybe more." Lucas swung into the saddle. "Get everyone who can ride out there now. We need to turn them before they hit the buildings." "What about the men who can't ride?" Elena asked. "Get them inside and keep them there. If those cattle make it to the yard—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. He galloped off with Garrett and Henry right behind him. Elena watched them disappear into the dust cloud, her heart in her throat. "Come on," Clara said, grabbing her arm. "We got work to do." They spent the next 20 minutes securing the ranch, closing shutters, moving equipment inside, getting the 3 men who didn't ride into the main house. Through the windows, Elena could see the dust cloud getting closer, could hear the terrible thunder of hooves. Then she saw Lucas. He was in front of the herd now, his horse at a full gallop, trying to angle the lead cattle east. For a moment it looked like it might work. The front of the stampede started to turn. Then his horse stumbled. Elena saw it happen like it was in slow motion. The horse went down hard, throwing Lucas forward. He hit the ground and rolled, trying to get clear, but the cattle were already on top of him. She was running before she knew she'd moved, screaming his name even though he couldn't possibly hear her over the roar of the stampede. Clara tackled her from behind, driving them both to the ground behind a water trough. "Don't be stupid," Clara hissed in her ear. "You can't help him out there. He's gonna die." "Maybe. But you running into a stampede won't change that. Just give us 2 bodies instead of 1. Elena struggled, but Clara held her down with surprising strength. They lay there in the dirt while the herd thundered past, so close Elena could have reached out and touched them. The noise was unbearable, hooves, bellowing, the crash of anything in their path being destroyed. It felt like it lasted forever. It probably lasted 2 minutes. When the dust finally started to clear, Elena shoved Clara off and ran. Other men were running too, all heading toward the same place, a crumpled shape in the dirt where Lucas had fallen. Garrett got there first. He dropped to his knees and Elena saw his face go white. "He's alive," Garrett called out. "Barely. Someone get Clara. Now." Elena skidded to a stop next to them and immediately wished she hadn't looked. Lucas was conscious but broken, his left leg bent at an angle that made her stomach turn, his chest rising and falling in short, painful gasps. Blood seeped from a gash on his head and God knew how many other places. "Hey," he managed, his voice a rasp. "Cattle make it past the buildings?" "That's what you're worried about?" Elena's voice came out strangled. You're, I'm fine." He tried to sit up and went gray, gasping. "Don't move," Garrett ordered. "Clara's coming. Just don't move." Clara arrived with her medical kit and took one look at Lucas before she started barking orders. "Get a door off the shed. We need something flat to carry him on. Someone ride to town for the doctor. And someone find me clean water and every bandage we have." Men scattered to follow her instructions. Clara knelt beside Lucas and started checking for injuries with practiced efficiency. Elena watched her face go from concerned to grave. "How bad?" Lucas asked. "Bad enough." Clara didn't sugarcoat it. "Broken leg, definitely. Probably some ribs. You're bleeding internally, I can tell by the swelling, and you might have a concussion." She looked up at Garrett. "How far away did that horse throw him?" 20 feet, maybe more." "Then add a possible spinal injury to the list." Clara started wrapping his leg to stabilize it. "We need to get you inside. This is going to hurt." "Everything already hurts." 4 men carried Lucas into the house on the makeshift stretcher, and Elena heard him try not to scream when they jostled his leg. They laid him on his bed, and Clara immediately started cutting away his clothes to assess the damage. "Out," she said to everyone except Elena. "I need room to work." The men filed out, their faces showing the same fear Elena felt. When the door closed, Clara looked at her. "Can you handle this?" "I don't know." "We'll figure it out fast. I need another pair of hands." For the next hour, Elena did things she'd never imagined doing, held Lucas down while Clara set his leg, watched her stitch the gash on his head with thread meant for saddles, helped clean blood from wounds she could barely look at. Lucas passed out twice from the pain, which Clara said was a mercy. By the time the doctor arrived from town, the worst was done. He examined Lucas, conferred with Clara in low voices, then gave Elena a look that made her knees weak. "I'll be honest with you, miss. Next few days are critical. If there's internal bleeding we can't stop, or if infection sets in, or if his spine is damaged worse than we think," he didn't finish. "Best you can do is keep him comfortable, keep him still, and pray." After he left, Elena sat in a chair next to Lucas's bed and stared at his still face. His breathing was shallow but steady. The rise and fall of his chest was the only thing keeping her from falling apart completely. Clara came in with broth and clean bandages. "You should eat something." "I'm not hungry." "You need your strength. This isn't a sprint, Elena. It's going to be a marathon." "What if he doesn't make it?" Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Then you'll grieve. But that man's tougher than old leather. If anyone can survive this, it's him." She set the broth on the bedside table. "But he's going to need you to be strong. Can you do that?" Elena looked at Lucas's battered face, at the bandages covering most of his torso, at his legs splinted and elevated. She thought about the conversation they'd had just 3 weeks ago, about losing people he cared about being afraid to care about her because he might lose her too. She reached out and took his hand carefully, avoiding the worst of the scrapes. "I can do that," she said. The first night was the worst. Lucas's fever spiked just after midnight, and Elena spent hours sponging him down with cool water while he thrashed and mumbled incoherently. Once he called for his mother, once he shouted something about fire. Mostly he just made sounds of pain that cut through Elena like knives. By dawn, the fever had broken slightly, and he fell into a restless sleep. Elena slumped in her chair, exhausted, and found Clara standing in the doorway with fresh coffee. "Go get some sleep," Clara said. "I'll watch him." "I'm fine." "You look like death. Sleep for 2 hours. That's an order." Elena wanted to argue, but her body was already shutting down. She made it to her own room, fell onto the bed fully clothed, and was asleep before her head hit the pillow. She woke to someone shaking her shoulder. Garrett stood over her, his face urgent. "Miss Ward, we got a problem." Elena sat up, her heart hammering. "Is Lucas?" "He's the same, but we need you in the yard, now." She followed him outside to find all the men gathered in a tense circle. In the center stood a young cowboy she didn't recognize, his clothes torn and his face bruised. "This is Jake," Garrett said. "He rode in about 10 minutes ago from the Fletcher Ranch east of here. Tell her what you told us." Jake twisted his hat in his hands. "Fletcher's planning to raid your herd tonight. Figures with Lucas laid up, you won't be able to defend yourselves. He's got 15 men ready to ride in and take whatever cattle they can drive off." Elena's blood went cold. "Why would he do that?" "Because your cattle are on better grazing land than his, and he's always been jealous of this ranch's success. With Lucas out of commission, he thinks this is his chance." Jake looked miserable. "I'm sorry. I know I'm a stranger telling you this, but Fletcher's planning to ruin you, and I couldn't just stand by and let it happen." "How do we know you're telling the truth?" Henry asked. "You don't. But if 15 men show up at midnight to steal your herd, you'll know I wasn't lying." Jake met Elena's eyes. "I rode 3 hours to warn you. That's all I can do." Garrett looked at Elena. "What do you want to do?" The question hit her like a slap. They were asking her, not Lucas. Her. "How many men do we have who can fight?" 10, if we count the ones who are better with a rifle than a rope. Garrett's jaw was tight. "But we're outnumbered, and most of us are exhausted from the stampede. If it comes to a real fight, we'll lose." "Then we can't let it come to a real fight." Elena's mind was racing, trying to think like Lucas would think. "Where are the cattle now?" "South pasture, about 2 miles out. Can we move them?" "Not without half the crew, and that would leave the ranch defenseless." Elena paced, thinking. 15 men against 10. They needed an advantage, something Fletcher wouldn't expect. "What if we make them think we have more men than we do?" she said slowly. "Set up scarecrows, light extra fires, make noise like there's an army here. And if they still come, we'll be ready with every gun we have. Billy spoke up. I got dynamite left from clearing the burned pasture. We could set charges around the approaches to the ranch. Not to kill anyone, but to scare the hell out of them. That's dangerous, Garrett said. So is doing nothing. Elena looked around at the men. I know I'm not Lucas. I know I'm not a rancher or a fighter, but this is our home now, all of ours, and I'll be damned if I let Fletcher take it without a fight. So I'm asking, will you help me defend it? The men looked at each other. Then, one by one, they nodded. Hell with it, Garrett said. Let's give them a war they won't forget. They spent the rest of the day preparing. The men who could sew worked with Elena to make crude human shapes out of straw and old clothes. They positioned them around the ranch at strategic points, making it look like armed men were everywhere. Billy and Thomas set explosive charges on the two main approaches, rigged to detonate if anyone rode over them. Henry and the older hands loaded every rifle and pistol on the ranch. Elena checked on Lucas between tasks. His fever was down, but he was still unconscious. His breathing labored. Clara sat beside him with a rifle across her lap. I'm not letting anyone get to this house, Clara said. They want him. They'll have to go through me first. I should stay here with you. No. Those men out there need someone to give them orders, someone to keep them steady. Lucas would want that someone to be you. Clara's expression softened slightly. You've grown into this, Elena, more than you probably realize. Now go show Fletcher's men what happens when they mess with this ranch. Elena went back outside as the sun was setting. The men had taken up positions around the property, some hidden in the barn loft with rifles, others crouched behind water troughs and fences. The scarecrows stood at attention, looking disturbingly real in the fading light. Jake had volunteered to stay and fight, and Garrett had positioned him where he could see the eastern approach. They'll come from that direction, Jake said. Fletcher always attacks from the east. How do you know? Because I've seen him do it twice before to other ranches. Jake's face was hard. He's a bully and a thief, and somebody needs to stand up to him. The wait was agonizing. Elena sat behind a pile of lumber with a rifle she barely knew how to use, watching the horizon and trying to keep her hands from shaking. Around her, she could hear the men breathing, the creak of leather, the occasional nervous cough. Midnight came and went. Then 1 a.m. Elena started to hope Jake had been wrong, or that Fletcher had changed his mind. Then she heard horses. A lot of horses. They came from the east just like Jake predicted, 15 riders in a loose formation, moving fast. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Hold steady, Garrett called softly. Wait for my signal. The riders got closer. 50 yards. 40. 30. Then the first one hit Billy's dynamite charge. The explosion lit up the night like daylight and sent 3 horses rearing in panic. The riders shouted in confusion and fear. Before they could recover, Billy set off the second charge, this one even closer. Now, Garrett shouted. Every man on the ranch opened fire at once, not at the riders, but into the air and at the ground around them. The sound was deafening. Between the gunfire and the explosions and the scarecrows that looked like armed men in the darkness, it must have seemed like they'd ridden into an army. Fletcher's men broke and ran. They scattered in every direction, some dropping their weapons, all of them riding hell-bent for anywhere else. In less than a minute, the attack was over. The ranch hands erupted in cheers. Billy actually whooped, but Elena just sat there with the rifle across her lap, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Garrett appeared beside her. You all right? I thought someone would get killed. No one did. You played it smart, scared them instead of fighting them. He helped her stand. Lucas would be proud. They checked the perimeter to make sure no one was hiding in wait for a second attack, but the night stayed quiet. Jake confirmed that the riders were definitely Fletcher's men. He recognized several of them. They won't be back, Jake said. Fletcher doesn't have the stomach for a real fight. He only picks on people he thinks are weak. Then he picked wrong, Elena said. She went inside to check on Lucas and found him awake for the first time in 2 days. His eyes were unfocused, and he looked terrible, but he was conscious. What happened? He rasped. I heard explosions. Elena sat on the edge of the bed and took his hand. Fletcher tried to raid the herd. We stopped him. We? Your men. Clara. Me. She squeezed his fingers gently. Everyone. Lucas closed his eyes. Did anyone get hurt? No. The cattle? Safe. The ranch? Still standing. Elena felt tears building and fought them back. You need to rest now. Stop worrying about everything and just heal. Can't stop worrying. It's my job. Not anymore. Right now your only job is to not die. Her voice broke on the last word. Please, that's all I'm asking. Just don't die. Lucas opened his eyes again and looked at her with an expression that made her chest ache. Elena, I know what you're going to say. That you might not make it, that I should prepare myself, that things are bad. But I don't care. You're going to live because you're too stubborn to do anything else, and because I'm not done with you yet. The tears came now, and she didn't bother wiping them away. Do you understand? I'm not done with you. He tried to reach for her face, but his arm was too weak. Elena leaned down so he could touch her cheek with trembling fingers. Not done with you either, he whispered. Then his eyes slid closed again, and he was asleep. The next week was a blur. Lucas drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes delirious with fever. Elena barely left his side. She slept in the chair next to his bed, ate when Clara forced her to, and spent every waking moment watching him breathe. The men kept the ranch running without being asked. They handled the cattle, maintained the equipment, did all the work that normally required Lucas's direction. Garrett stepped up as de facto foreman, making decisions and keeping everyone organized. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. On the 8th day, Lucas woke up clear-eyed and stayed that way for more than an hour. Claire examined him and declared that the worst had passed. You're not out of the woods yet, she warned. That leg's going to take months to heal properly, and you're weak as a kitten, but I think you're going to live. Told you he was too stubborn, Elena said, trying to keep her voice light, even though she wanted to sob with relief. Over the following days, Lucas slowly improved. His fever stayed down. He started eating solid food. The color came back to his face, though he still looked like he'd been trampled by cattle, which, Elena had to remind herself, he had been. They talked when he had the strength for it. Lucas wanted to know everything that had happened since the stampede, how Elena had organized the defense against Fletcher, how the men had stepped up, how the ranch was holding together. You saved everything, he said one afternoon. The herd, the ranch, maybe even my life. You know that, right? I didn't do it alone. But you led them, that matters. He shifted in bed, wincing. I've been thinking about something, about us. Elena's heart stuttered. What about us? This thing between us. It's real, isn't it? Not just because we're stuck out here together, or because you work for me. It's real, Elena said quietly. Good. Because when I was lying in that dirt waiting to be trampled, all I could think was that I'd never told you how I actually felt. Never said the words that mattered. He reached for her hand. I love you, Elena. Have for months, probably. Was just too scared to admit it. Elena's throat was so tight she could barely speak. I love you too. Even though I'm broken and probably going to limp for the rest of my life? Especially because of that. Lucas laughed, then immediately regretted it as his ribs protested. Why especially? Because it means you're human. Breakable, we're real. She laced her fingers through his. I don't need you to be perfect, Lucas. I just need you to be here. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. His expression turned serious. But there's something we need to talk about. When I'm healed enough, when things are stable, I want to marry you, if you'll have me. Elena stared at him, her heart pounding. Are you asking or telling? Asking. Definitely asking. I've learned my lesson about trying to make decisions for you. His thumb rubbed across her knuckles. So, what do you say? Will you marry me? She thought about the woman who'd arrived at this ranch 6 months ago, desperate, broke, with $12 and no future. She thought about everything that had happened since, every lesson taught and crisis survived and moment of terror and joy. And she thought about the man in this bed, who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd believed in her, fought beside her, and loved her even when it scared him. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Lucas pulled her down carefully and kissed her, and Elena tasted salt from both their tears. Outside the window, The ranch went on. Cattle lowed in the distance. Men called to each other across the yard. The mountains stood silent against the sky. Everything had changed, and nothing had changed. The work would continue. The struggles wouldn't end. But for the first time in her life, Elena knew exactly where she belonged, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was home. Lucas's recovery was slower than either of them wanted, and twice as frustrating. 3 weeks after the stampede, he could sit up without help. 4 weeks, he could stand on his good leg for a few minutes before the pain drove him back to bed. By week 5, he was using crutches to hobble around the house, cursing every step. "I should be out there," he said for the 100th time, staring out the window at the men working cattle in the south pasture. "Garrett's doing his best, but he shouldn't have to run everything alone." "Garrett's not alone. He has 11 other men helping him." Elena didn't look up from the ledger she was updating. "And you hobbling around on a broken leg won't make the work go faster. It'll just slow everyone down while they worry about you falling over. I'm not that weak. You fell over yesterday trying to reach the coffee pot." Lucas glared at her, but there was no heat in it. That was different. "How?" "I was distracted." "By what?" "You were bending over to pick up a book." His mouth twitched. Can't blame a man for losing his balance. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "That's inappropriate. We're engaged. I'm allowed to appreciate my future wife. You're allowed to heal." She closed the ledger with more force than necessary and stopped trying to change the subject. "You need rest, not work." "I've been resting for 5 weeks. I'm losing my mind." Elena understood the feeling. The ranch had settled into a new rhythm without Lucas at its center, and while that rhythm mostly worked, it wasn't the same. The men came to her now with questions about supplies and schedules, and to Garrett for decisions about the cattle and daily operations. Between the two of them, they kept things running, but it felt temporary, like everyone was holding their breath waiting for Lucas to reclaim his place. She looked at him now, sitting in his chair with his bad leg propped up and his crutches leaning against the armrest, and saw the frustration eating at him. Lucas was a man who worked with his hands, who led by example, who measured his worth by what he could do. Being helpless went against everything in his nature. "What if we brought the ranch to you?" she said suddenly. "What?" "You can't go out there, so we bring the work here. Have the men report to you every morning, run their ideas past you, let you make the decisions even if they're the ones executing them." She warmed to the idea as she spoke. "You could review the books, plan next year's breeding schedule, write to suppliers. There's plenty you can do from a chair." Lucas considered this, his expression shifting from frustration to something like hope. "You think the men would go for it?" "I think they've been waiting for you to tell them what to do since you got trampled. They respect Garrett, but you're the one they trust." "And you? Where do you fit in all this?" Elena met his eyes. "Wherever you need me." That afternoon, they called a meeting in the main house. All 12 men crowded into the front room, tracking mud and bringing the smell of horses and leather with them. Lucas sat in his chair like a king holding court, and despite the crutches and the healing wounds, he looked more like himself than he had in weeks. "All right," he said without preamble. "I know I've been useless lately. That changes today. Garrett, tell me what's happening with the herd." Garrett straightened. "South pasture grazing is good. We've got about 300 head there now. The north pasture is still recovering from the fire, but it should be ready for rotational grazing by spring. We lost 2 calves last week, one to coyotes, one just didn't make it." "What are you doing about the coyotes?" "Set traps. Shot one. But they're persistent." Lucas nodded. "Double the traps, and I want night patrols, 2 men on rotation. Coyotes are bold right now because they think we're weak. Show them we're not." They went through every aspect of ranch operations: fencing that needed repair, equipment that needed replacing, a dispute between 2 hands about who was responsible for a broken wagon wheel. Lucas listened, asked questions, made decisions. The men responded to him instantly, straightening when he addressed them, nodding when he gave orders. Elena watched from the doorway and saw the ranch come back to life in that room. When the meeting ended, Henry lingered after the others left. "Boss, there's something else." "Go ahead." "The men have been talking about Miss Ward." Henry glanced at Elena, then back at Lucas. "We know you two are planning to marry, and we think, Well, we think she's earned a stake in the ranch, same as the rest of us. Lucas's eyebrows rose. You want Elena to be a partner? She already is, isn't she? She kept this place running when you were down. Organized the defense against Fletcher. Does the books better than anyone we've ever had. Henry twisted his hat. Seems only fair she gets a piece of what she helped save. Lucas looked at Elena. What do you think? Elena's throat was tight. I don't need... That's not what I asked. I asked what you think. She thought about the woman who'd arrived with $12 in desperation, about every door that had slammed in her face, every man who'd told her she wasn't good enough, every moment she'd had to prove herself twice as hard for half the recognition. I think I'd like that, she said quietly. Then it settled. Lucas turned back to Henry. Draw up the papers. Elena gets the same stake as anyone else who invested in the ranch, based on her contributions. And Henry, thank you for seeing what she's worth. Henry smiled. We all see it, boss. Took you long enough to catch up. After he left, Elena sat down heavily in the nearest chair. I can't believe they did that. I can. You've earned their respect. Lucas reached for her hand. Hell, you've earned mine about 10 times over. Should have made you a partner months ago. You were a little busy getting trampled. Before that, I should have seen... He stopped, his jaw working. I'm not good at this. At seeing people's value beyond what they can do with a rope or a branding iron. But you showed me different. Showed all of us different. Elena squeezed his hand. We've all learned from each other. That's what makes this place work. That night, Elena lay in her own bed. They'd agreed to maintain propriety until the wedding, despite Lucas's grumbling, and stared at the ceiling. A partner in the Twin Creek Ranch. A future wife. A woman with purpose and place and power. If her father could see her now, he probably wouldn't believe it. Hell, if the school boards that had rejected her could see her now, they'd probably have a collective fit. The thought made her smile in the darkness. The next morning brought news that wiped the smile away. Billy rode in just after dawn with a newspaper from town, his face troubled. You need to see this, he said, handing it to Elena. The headline made her stomach drop. Frontier Education, One Woman's Radical Experiment. The article was about her, about the ranch, the teaching program, the unconventional methods she'd used to educate grown men. It was mostly accurate, but the tone was mocking, calling her approach unorthodox, questioning whether such informal instruction could produce real results, suggesting that proper educators would be appalled. Worse, the article ended with a quote from an unnamed source saying that Miss Ward's program raises serious questions about the standards of frontier education and whether women should be entrusted with such responsibilities without proper oversight. Elena read it twice, feeling sick. Lucas read it once and threw it across the room. Who the hell wrote this? Someone who doesn't like what I'm doing. Elena picked up the paper. Or doesn't like that I'm doing it at all. It's garbage, ignore it. But Elena couldn't ignore it, because 2 days later, a man arrived from the Territorial Education Board with a letter informing her that her teaching methods were under review, and she was required to submit to an evaluation or cease all educational activities immediately. The man's name was Pritchard, and he had the look of someone who'd never gotten his hands dirty in his life. Soft palms, clean fingernails, a suit that probably cost more than Elena made in a month. He stood in Lucas's office with his letter of authority and an expression of professional disdain. I'm here to ensure educational standards are being maintained, he said. We've received complaints that your methods are, shall we say, questionable. Complaints from who? Elena asked. That's confidential. How convenient. Lucas was standing now, leaning heavily on his crutches but radiating anger. Let me guess. Someone's trying to shut down Elena's program because it's working too well and making traditional schools look bad. Pritchard's smile was thin. I'm simply here to evaluate. If Miss Ward's teaching meets proper standards, she'll have nothing to worry about. And if you decide it doesn't, then she'll be required to stop teaching immediately or face legal consequences for operating an unlicensed educational program. Elena felt the ground shift under her feet. The men will lose everything they've learned. The progress they've made should have been made through proper channels with certified instructors. Pritchard opened his briefcase. I'll be observing your next 3 lessons, reviewing your curriculum, and interviewing your students. The evaluation begins tomorrow. He left before Elena could respond. Lucas immediately started pacing, as much as he could on crutches. This is political. Someone's using the education board to attack you. Someone who read that article and saw an opportunity. Elena sat down, her mind racing. What if I can't pass this evaluation? What if everything I've taught doesn't meet their standards because I didn't do it their way? Then their standards are wrong. That doesn't matter if they have the legal authority to shut me down. Lucas stopped pacing. What do you need? I need to prepare. Go through everything I've taught, organize it, make it look as professional as possible. She looked up at him. And I need the men ready to be interviewed. If Pritchard talks to them, they need to show him exactly what they've learned. That night, Elena worked until her eyes burned. She created lesson plans retroactively, documented the men's progress, compiled examples of their writing. By morning, she had a portfolio thick enough to choke a horse. Pritchard arrived promptly at 6 for the first lesson. He sat in the back of the barn with a notebook, watching everything Elena did with an expression that gave away nothing. The men were nervous. She could see it in the way they fidgeted, the way their answers came out too formal. But they tried. When Elena asked them to read from a contract, they read clearly. When she asked them to identify problematic clauses, they found every single one. After the lesson, Pritchard interviewed Thomas. What was your reading level when you started Miss Ward's program? He asked. Couldn't read at all, Thomas said honestly. Never learned. My pa didn't think it mattered for ranch work. And now? Now I read to my daughter every time I visit her, wrote her a letter last week that she said was better than most she gets from educated folks. Thomas's voice was steady. Miss Ward taught me that in 6 months. That's more than I learned in my whole life before. Pritchard wrote something in his notebook. And her methods. Do they align with proper educational practices? I don't know what that means. But I know she didn't treat us like idiots. She taught us things that mattered to our lives, not just words on a page that meant nothing. Thomas leaned forward. You want to know if she's a good teacher? Ask yourself if a man who couldn't write his own name 6 months ago can now write a letter his daughter's proud of. That's your answer. The second lesson went better. The men relaxed slightly, and their true abilities showed through. Garrett read a complex passage from the newspaper and analyzed its arguments. Billy demonstrated his mathematical skills by calculating interest on a loan. Henry presented a letter he'd written applying for a better position at a ranch in Colorado. Why would you leave this ranch? Pritchard asked him. I'm not planning to. But Miss Ward taught us we should always know our options, always be able to negotiate from a position of knowledge. Henry smiled. She taught us our worth. That's more valuable than just reading and writing. The third lesson was the hardest. Pritchard asked Elena to teach a completely new topic, something she hadn't prepared for. She chose map reading, partly because several men had requested it, partly because she knew it would demonstrate practical application. She brought out a territorial map and taught them how to read coordinates, calculate distances, identify landmarks. The men caught on quickly, asking smart questions, making connections to their own travel experiences. When it was over, Pritchard closed his notebook and stood. I'll submit my report to the board within the week. You'll be notified of their decision. Can you tell me how I did? Elena asked. That would be inappropriate, but something in his expression shifted. I will say this. Your students are more engaged than most I've observed in traditional classrooms. Whether that's sufficient to meet our standards remains to be seen. After he left, the men gathered around Elena. We did good, right? Billy asked. We showed him? You were perfect. All of you. Elena's voice was thick. Whatever happens, I'm proud of what we've accomplished together. Nothing's going to happen, Garrett said firmly. You're the best teacher any of us ever had. If that board has any sense, they'll see that. But sense and bureaucracy didn't always align, and Elena spent the next week in a state of barely controlled panic. She continued teaching. If these were her last lessons, she'd make them count. But every time she saw a rider approaching the ranch, her heart stopped. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, delivered by the same courier who'd brought Pritchard's initial notification. Elena's hands shook so badly she could barely open it. Lucas stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder. Whatever it says, we'll figure it out. Elena unfolded the letter and read aloud. After thorough evaluation of Miss Elena Ward's educational program, the Territorial Education Board finds that while her methods are unconventional, the results demonstrate significant educational value. However, to continue operating, Miss Ward must obtain formal teaching certification within 6 months and submit to annual reviews. Failure to comply will result in immediate cessation of all educational activities. She read it again to make sure she understood. They're letting me keep teaching. With conditions, Lucas said. Madame. But they're letting me keep teaching. Elena started laughing, slightly hysterical. I have to get certified, but they're letting me keep teaching. The men whooped when she told them. Billy literally jumped in the air. Thomas hugged her so hard he lifted her off her feet. We should celebrate, Henry said. Big dinner tonight. Claire's been saving a ham. That evening, the entire ranch gathered around a table laden with more food than Elena had seen since arriving. Clara had indeed cooked the ham, along with potatoes, beans, fresh bread, and a pie that smelled like heaven. Lucas stood at the head of the table, still using one crutch, but standing. I want to say something before we eat. This ranch has been through hell this year. Fire, stampede, attacks, injuries. We should have broken under all that. But we didn't. You know why? The men waited. Because we stopped being just a ranch and became a family. Because we invested in each other, not just money, but time and trust and sweat. And because we had the good sense to listen when a stubborn woman from Boston told us we could be better than we were. He raised his glass. To Elena, who saved this ranch more times than she probably realizes. To Elena, the men chorused. Elena felt tears burning and blinked them back. I couldn't have done any of it without all of you. You took a chance on me when you had no reason to. You showed up, did the work, believed that learning mattered. That's not me. That's you. It's all of us, Thomas said. That's the point. They ate until they couldn't move, then sat around talking and laughing while the sun set and the stars came out. Elena leaned against Lucas, his arm around her shoulders, and felt something settle in her chest that she'd been missing her entire life. This was what home felt like. Later, when most of the men had gone to the bunkhouse and only Clara remained in the kitchen cleaning up, Lucas pulled Elena outside to the porch. I've been thinking, he said. About what? About the wedding. We've been engaged for 2 months, and we keep saying soon without actually setting a date. Elena's heart picked up speed. What did you have in mind? Christmas. I know it's only 6 weeks away, and we'd have to plan fast, but... He stopped, looking almost nervous. I don't want to wait anymore. I've waited my whole life for someone like you. Now that I have you, waiting feels like wasting time. Christmas, Elena repeated, testing the word. That's soon. Too soon? No, not too soon. She smiled. Perfect, actually. Lucas kissed her, soft and slow, and when they pulled apart, he was grinning. Clara's going to have opinions about this. Clara has opinions about everything. They told Clara the next morning over breakfast. She set down her coffee cup with exaggerated care. 6 weeks. You want to plan a wedding in 6 weeks? Yes, Elena said. During the busiest time of year on a ranch, right before winter sets in, when we'll have a dozen things that could go wrong. Yes. Clara stared at them for a long moment. Then she smiled. Well, hell, let's do it right then. Who are we inviting? The guest list was simple. The ranch hands, a few neighbors, Clara's sister from town, and the doctor who'd saved Lucas's life. Elena had no family to invite, which stung less than she expected. The people at this table, in this house, on this land, they were her family now. Planning the wedding became a group effort. Clara organized the food. The men built an arch decorated with evergreen branches. Billy volunteered to ride to town for Elena's dress, which she'd ordered from a catalog with measurements Clara had insisted on taking twice. Henry pulled Elena aside one afternoon while she was reviewing the ranch accounts. Got a question about your teaching. What about it? You're going to get that certification, right? Keep doing what you're doing? That's the plan. Good. Because I've been thinking, there's other ranches around here with men who can't read, other people who need what you're teaching. He twisted his hat. What if you didn't stop with just us? Elena set down her pen. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you think bigger. Train other teachers maybe, or travel to different ranches, or start a real school. You've proved this works. Why keep it small when you could help hundreds of people? The idea hit Elena like lightning. She'd been so focused on survival, on keeping her small program alive, that she hadn't thought about expansion. But Henry was right. If her methods worked here, they could work elsewhere. That would take resources, money, time, support. So build it. You've built everything else. Elena thought about it for the rest of the day. That night, she mentioned it to Lucas. A school, he said slowly. Your own school. Maybe. Eventually. First, I need certification, and we need to stabilize the ranch, and you'll find 100 reasons to wait if you look for them. Lucas shifted to face her better. Listen to me. I've spent my whole life being careful, being conservative, protecting what I have, instead of reaching for what I could have. And where did it get me? Nearly trampled to death and almost losing everything anyway. You know what saved this ranch? Taking risks, trying new things. You. This is different. It's exactly the same. You have knowledge people need. You have proof it works. If you want to build something bigger, then build it. I'll help. The men will help. Hell, half of them would probably volunteer to teach if you asked. Elena looked at him. This man who'd taken a chance on her when no one else would, who'd let her change his ranch, his life, himself. I'd need to write it all down, she said slowly. Document my methods, create a curriculum that others could follow. That would take time. So take time. We've got plenty of winter ahead of us for writing. And I'd need to start small. Maybe a few articles for newspapers, sharing what I've learned. Build credibility. You've already got credibility. You've got results. Elena felt excitement building in her chest. I could write about teaching practical literacy, about education that serves people's actual lives instead of abstract ideals. Now you're thinking like the woman I'm marrying. They stayed up late that night planning, and the next morning Elena started writing. She began with an article about teaching adults to read, focusing on the methods that had worked and the mistakes she'd made. It was 3 pages long and probably terrible, but it was a start. She sent it to 3 newspapers and promptly forgot about it, too busy with wedding plans and teaching and getting Lucas through physical therapy as his leg healed. 2 weeks before Christmas, a letter arrived from the Denver Post. They wanted to publish her article and asked if she had more. Elena read the letter 3 times to make sure it was real. They want to pay me, she told Lucas, her voice faint. Actual money. For my writing. How much? $20. Lucas whistled. For 1 article? Elena, that's more than I made in a month when I first got here. She sat down hard. They want more. They want a series on frontier education. Then give them a series. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I'm good enough. Lucas took her face in his hands. You're good enough. You've always been good enough. The only person who doesn't believe that is you. Elena kissed him hard, then pulled back. I'm going to need a better workspace and more paper, a lot more paper. Whatever you need. By Christmas Eve, Elena had written 4 more articles and sent them off. She'd also finished documenting her teaching methods, manual she hoped would help other frontier educators. And she'd somehow managed to help Clara prepare food for 30 people while reviewing the ranch's year-end finances. She was exhausted, exhilarated, and terrified about the wedding. The ceremony was planned for noon on Christmas Day. Clara had transformed the main house with evergreen branches and candles. The men had cleaned up so thoroughly they barely looked like themselves, shaved, combed, wearing clothes that didn't have holes or permanent stains. Elena stood in her room wearing the dress Billy had brought from town, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, nothing fancy but beautiful in its simplicity. Clara had helped her pin up her hair and was now fussing with the veil. Stop fidgeting, Clara ordered. I can't help it. You're marrying the best man in 3 territories. What's there to be nervous about? Everything. What if I trip walking down the stairs? What if I forget my vows? What if you stop panicking and enjoy this? Clara stepped back to look at her. You look beautiful. Lucas is going to lose his mind when he sees you. There was a knock at the door. Henry's voice came through. Ready when you are, Miss Ward. Elena took a deep breath. Ready. Clara opened the door and Elena stepped out into her future. The stairs seemed longer than Elena remembered. Each step down felt both too fast and too slow, her hand gripping the banister while her heart hammered against her ribs. At the bottom, Lucas waited with Henry beside him, and when he saw her, his expression did exactly what Clara had predicted. His face went soft and stunned and completely unguarded. He was wearing a suit she'd never seen before, probably borrowed because his shoulders strained slightly at the seams. His leg was still weak. She could see him shifting his weight carefully, but he stood straight and tall, and when their eyes met, she forgot to breathe. Henry offered his arm, and Elena took it, grateful for the support because her legs had turned unreliable. They walked through the main room where chairs had been arranged in rows, and every surface held candles that made the whole space glow. The ranch hands sat on one side, Clara and the neighbors on the other, and at the front stood the circuit preacher who traveled between frontier towns performing marriages and burials. Elena barely heard the ceremony. She was too aware of Lucas's hand holding hers, too focused on the way he looked at her like she was something precious and impossible. When the preacher asked if she took this man, her voice came out stronger than she expected. "I do." Lucas's vows were simpler than the traditional words, rougher and more honest. "I take you as my wife, my partner, my equal. Everything I have is yours. Everything I am is yours. From this day until my last." When he kissed her, the room erupted in cheers and whistles. Billy actually threw his hat in the air. Elena kissed Lucas back and tasted salt. Whether from her tears or his, she couldn't tell. The celebration afterward was loud and chaotic and perfect. Clara had outdone herself with the food. Roasted turkey, ham, potatoes cooked 3 different ways, vegetables, bread, and 3 different pies. The men ate like they'd been starving, going back for seconds and thirds while trading insults and stories. Thomas stood up to give a toast, his glass raised and his voice carrying across the room. "I ain't good with words. Well, I'm better than I used to be thanks to the bride. But I want to say something. A year ago, most of us couldn't read our own names. We were getting cheated, getting lost, getting taken advantage of because we didn't know better. Then Miss Ward showed up and changed everything." He looked at Elena. "You gave us more than reading and writing. You gave us our dignity back. Made us believe we could be more than what everyone told us we were. That's worth more than I can say. So here's to you and Lucas. May you be as happy as you've made the rest of us." "To Lucas and Elena," the room chorused. Elena wiped her eyes and tried to compose herself, but Garrett was already standing with his own toast prepared. "I'm going to keep this short because I'm getting hungry again," he said, which got laughs. When the boss first told us about hiring a teacher, half of us thought he'd lost his mind. A woman from Boston teaching cowboys? Seemed like a disaster waiting to happen. But Elena proved us all wrong. She's tougher than most men I know, smarter than all of us combined, and the best thing that ever happened to this ranch. "Lucas, you're a lucky son of a—" He caught himself. "You're a lucky man." More toasts followed, each one loosening the knot in Elena's throat a little more. Billy talked about how she'd helped him write a letter that got him a marriage proposal from his sweetheart in town. Henry described learning to read the deed to his grandfather's land and discovering it was worth twice what he'd thought. Even Jake, who'd ridden in to warn them about Fletcher and ended up staying on as a ranch hand, stood up to say that Elena had shown him what real courage looked like. By the time they finished eating, Elena felt wrung out from emotion. Lucas seemed to sense it because he squeezed her hand under the table. "You all right?" he murmured. "I just need air." They slipped out while the men were arguing about who was going to get the last piece of pie. Outside, the winter air was sharp and clean, and stars covered the sky in a blanket so thick it looked like someone had spilled salt. "That was a lot," Elena said. "Too much?" "No, perfect. Just overwhelming." She leaned against the porch rail. "A year ago, I was sleeping on a bench in a stagecoach station. Now I'm married, part owner of a ranch, a published writer. It doesn't feel real." Lucas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "It's real. You made it real by refusing to give up." "We made it real, all of us." They stood there in the cold, watching their breath fog in the air and listening to the muffled sounds of celebration inside. After a while, Lucas said, "I got you something. Wedding present." "We agreed no presents." "Yeah, well, I'm bad at following rules." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Here." Elena unfolded it and had to tilt it toward the lamplight from the window to read. It was a deed to 40 acres of land adjacent to the ranch property. "I don't understand," she said. "It's yours. Your land, not the ranch's. I bought it last month with money from selling off some equipment we didn't need." Lucas's voice was quiet. "I know you put everything into this ranch, your money, your work, your future. But I wanted you to have something that was just yours. So if things ever go bad, if I ever let you down, if you ever need to leave, you'll have a place to go. Security that no one can take away." Elena stared at the deed, her vision blurring. "You think I'd leave? No. But I want you to know you could, that you're choosing to stay, not trapped into it." He turned her to face him. "You gave up everything to come here, left your whole life behind. I don't want you to ever feel like you're stuck with me because you have nowhere else to go." "Lucas," Elena put her hands on his face, "I'm not stuck with you. I chose you. I keep choosing you. And I don't need land to feel secure. I just need you to keep being the stubborn, difficult, impossibly good man I fell in love with." "I can probably manage that." "Good, because you're stuck with me too." She kissed him, then pulled back. "But I'm keeping the land. Might build a school on it someday." Lucas laughed. "Of course you will." They went back inside to find the celebration winding down. Several men had dozed off in their chairs, stuffed with food and maybe a little whiskey. Clara was already organizing cleanup with the efficiency of a general, and the neighbors were gathering their coats. Elena and Lucas thanked everyone until her voice went hoarse and his legs started visibly bothering him. Finally, Clara shooed the remaining guests toward the bunkhouse and gave the newlyweds a look that made Elena's face burn. "Your room's ready," Clara said simply. "I'll see you in the morning, late morning." When they were alone, Lucas took Elena's hand and led her upstairs to what was now their room. Not his room or her room, but theirs. Someone, probably Clara, had put fresh flowers on the dresser and new linens on the bed. Elena's nervousness came rushing back. "I should probably—" "Hey!" Lucas stopped her with a hand on her wrist. "We don't have to do anything you're not ready for." "I'm ready. I'm just—" She laughed shakily. "I don't know what I'm doing." "Neither do I, really. Been a long time." He sat on the edge of the bed with a grimace. "And my leg's killing me, so I might not be very graceful about this. We'll figure it out together?" Like everything else. They did figure it out, awkwardly at first, then with increasing confidence. And later, lying in the darkness with Lucas's arm around her and her head on his chest, Elena felt a peace she'd never known before. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me when no one else did. For taking a chance on a desperate woman with $12 and too much pride." Lucas kissed the top of her head. "Best investment I ever made." Winter settled in hard after Christmas. The temperature dropped until the water in the troughs froze overnight and the men's breath came out in white clouds. Snow fell in waves, blanketing the ranch in white and making everything twice as difficult. But inside the main house, Elena wrote. She wrote articles about frontier education, and they kept getting published. She wrote her teaching manual and revised it 3 times. She wrote letters to the Territorial Education Board documenting her progress toward certification. And she wrote about the ranch. Not for publication, but for herself. The story of how she'd arrived with nothing and built something that mattered. How 12 men had invested in themselves and changed their futures. How a stubborn rancher had become her partner in every sense of the word. The Denver Post published her series on practical literacy, and suddenly other newspapers wanted her work. The Rocky Mountain News asked her to write about women's education. A magazine in San Francisco requested an essay on frontier teaching methods. By February, Elena was making almost as much from writing as she'd made teaching. "You're going to be famous," Lucas said one night, reading over her latest article. "I'm going to be notorious. Half these papers publish my work just so people can argue about it in the letters section." People arguing means people paying attention. He set down the article. "And you know what happens when people pay attention to good ideas? Those ideas spread." He was right. By March, Elena started receiving letters from other teachers asking about her methods. A woman in Montana wanted to start a similar program. A man in Wyoming asked if she'd consult on his school's curriculum. The most surprising letter came from the Territorial Education Board itself. They'd reviewed her articles and her teaching manual, and they wanted to know if she'd be interested in training other frontier educators in her methods. Elena read the letter 3 times before she believed it. They want to pay me to teach teachers, she told Lucas, her voice faint. Travel to different towns, run workshops, help establish literacy programs. Are you going to do it? I don't know. It would mean leaving the ranch for weeks at a time, being away from you, from the men, from everything we've built here. Lucas was quiet for a moment. You know what I think? I think you're scared. Of course I'm scared. This is huge. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? You're good enough. You've always been good enough. He took her hands. And you're not going to fail because failure isn't in your nature. You'll work yourself to exhaustion before you'll let that happen. So you think I should do it? I think you should do what makes sense for you. But yeah, I think you should do it. This ranch will be here when you get back. I'll be here when you get back. But this opportunity? This chance to help hundreds of people instead of just 12? That might not come again. Elena looked at him. This man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd supported every crazy idea she'd had, who'd married her knowing she'd never be content to just keep house and have babies. I love you, she said. I know, that's why I'm telling you to go. She accepted the position the next day. Spring came late that year, but when it arrived it brought transformation. The burned pasture had recovered enough for grazing. The new fencing was finished. The cattle were fat and healthy, and the men were reading newspapers at breakfast and writing letters home during their free time. Billy got married to his sweetheart and brought her back to the ranch. She was shy at first, but Clara took her under wing, and soon she was helping with the cooking and learning to ride. Thomas's daughter came to visit and spent a week following Elena around, asking questions about education and women's rights, and whether she could maybe come back and study here instead of at her school in Denver. She reminds me of you, Lucas told Elena, watching the girl pester Garrett with questions about cattle breeding while simultaneously taking notes. She's much braver than I was at her age. You rode into the wilderness with a stranger and faced down armed men. You were plenty brave. I was desperate. There's a difference. Is there? Lucas pulled her close. Seems to me brave and desperate look pretty similar when you're in the moment. It's only looking back that you can tell which one it was. Elena left for her first teaching workshop in April. She traveled to 3 towns over 2 weeks, working with teachers and ranch owners and anyone interested in frontier education. It was exhausting and exhilarating and harder than anything she'd done since arriving at the ranch. But it worked. By the time she came home, 2 new literacy programs had started using her methods. A school in Colorado had hired a teacher specifically to work with adults, and Elena had a dozen more requests for workshops. Lucas met her at the door when she rode in, and the relief on his face made her heart clench. Missed you, he said simply. Missed you too. How's the ranch? Still standing. Garrett only threatened to quit twice, which is better than I expected. He took her bag. How was it? Terrifying. Amazing. I think I might have actually helped some people. Of course you did. You're you. That summer, the ranch thrived. They expanded the herd, hired 2 more hands, and started planning improvements for the following year. Elena continued writing and teaching workshops, though she limited her travel to once a month so she wouldn't be gone for too long. And slowly, quietly, the ranch became known for something beyond cattle. People started calling it that place with the educated cowboys. Other ranchers started asking if their men could attend Elena's lessons. A few even sent their daughters to learn bookkeeping from her. By autumn, Elena had trained enough people that she could step back from constant travel. She focused on writing her second book, a comprehensive guide to frontier education, while also helping Lucas manage the ranch's growing operations. One October evening, almost exactly 2 years after she'd first arrived, Elena sat on the porch watching the sunset. Lucas joined her, moving easier now that his leg had fully healed, though it still bothered him when the weather changed. Been thinking, he said. About what? About that land I gave you. What you said about maybe building a school. He gestured toward the 40 acres. What if we actually did it? Built a real school, not just a classroom in a barn. Hired teachers, created a curriculum, made it official. Elena's breath caught. That would be expensive. Take years. We've got money now. The ranch is doing well. Your writing brings in steady income, and we've got men who'd volunteer to help build it. Lucas looked at her. And I think there's a need. You get letters every week from people asking for help with education. What if instead of you traveling to them, they came here? A school, Elena said slowly. A real frontier education center. Why not? You've already proved the concept works. This would just be making it permanent. Elena thought about it. A building dedicated to learning, where adults could come to improve their reading and writing, where teachers could train in her methods, where people who'd been told they were too old or too uneducated could prove everyone wrong. Yes, she said, let's do it. They broke ground the following spring. The school building went up slowly, not because of lack of effort, but because they were building it right. Large windows for light, a wood stove for heat, proper desks and chairs, shelves for books that Elena and Lucas purchased from every catalog they could find. The ranch hands worked on it during their off hours. Neighboring ranchers sent lumber and supplies. Clara organized fundraising dinners. Even some of Elena's former students from other towns sent donations. By the time winter came again, the building was finished. It stood on Elena's land, solid and permanent, with Twin Creek Education Center painted above the door. They held the opening ceremony on a cold December morning. Over 50 people came. Teachers, ranchers, cowboys, families. The territorial education director gave a speech about innovative approaches to frontier learning. Several of Elena's former students talked about how her teaching had changed their lives. When it was Elena's turn to speak, she stood in front of the crowd and felt the weight of how far she'd come. 3 years ago, I knocked on 17 doors in Cripple Creek looking for work, she began. Every single one of those doors slammed in my face because I was a woman, because I was an outsider, because I didn't fit what people thought I should be. The 18th door belonged to this ranch, and the man who owned it took a chance on me even though he had no reason to. She looked at Lucas, standing in the front row with his arms crossed and his eyes bright. That chance changed my life. But more than that, it showed me something important, that the limitations other people place on us only matter if we accept them. The men who first sat through my lessons were told they were too old, too uneducated, too rough to learn. They proved everyone wrong. I was told I was too female, too inexperienced, too unconventional to teach. I proved everyone wrong, too. She gestured at the building behind her. This school exists because we refused to accept what we were told was possible. It exists because 12 cowboys invested in themselves and created something bigger than any of us imagined. And it exists because somewhere out there, right now, there's someone being told they're not good enough, not smart enough, not the right kind of person to learn or teach or succeed. This school is for them. So they know that those doors that keep slamming, they don't matter, because eventually you'll find the one that opens. And when you do, you walk through it and you build something that no one can take away. The crowd erupted in applause. Several people were crying. Thomas stepped forward with his daughter beside him. I want to be the first to enroll, he said. My Sarah here wants to be a teacher, and I can't think of a better place for her to learn than here. Sarah beamed at Elena with hope shining in her eyes, and Elena saw herself 3 years ago, desperate, determined, and ready to prove the world wrong. We'd be honored, she said. That night, after everyone had gone home and the celebration had wound down, Elena and Lucas walked through the empty school building. Their footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. The desks sat in neat rows waiting for students. The shelves waited for books. Think it'll work? Lucas asked. I think we'll make it work, like everything else. No regrets? About coming here? About everything that happened? Elena thought about the woman who'd arrived with $12 and nowhere to go. About every hard lesson and harder choice. About being trampled by fear and doubt and getting back up anyway. Not even one, she said. They stood in the middle of the classroom, and Elena could almost see the future unfolding, students filling these desks, teachers learning her methods, knowledge spreading like ripples in water. The scared, desperate woman she'd been wouldn't recognize the person she'd become, but that woman was still there, somewhere inside, still refusing to quit, still knocking on doors until one finally opened. Lucas pulled her close. What are you thinking about? About how I used to measure my life in what I didn't have. No job, no money, no future. And now I measure it in what we've built. She gestured at the classroom, at the ranch visible through the windows, at the life they'd created together. We turn nothing into something. That matters. It matters more than you know. You've changed lives, Elena, including mine. We changed each other. That's what partnership means. They locked up the school and walked back to the ranch house through the winter darkness. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney where the men were probably playing cards and arguing about something ridiculous. Lights glowed in the main house where Clara was likely organizing something that didn't need organizing. This was home. Not just a place, but a collection of people who'd chosen each other, who'd invested in each other, who'd built something worth fighting for. Elena had arrived at this ranch running from everything she'd lost. She was staying because of everything she'd found. And when she thought about the future, about the school full of students, about more books to write, about a life lived on her own terms beside a man who believed in her, she felt something she'd spent her whole life chasing. Not happiness exactly, something deeper than that. Peace, purpose, power that came from within instead of being granted by others. She'd built a life worth everything, and she was just getting started.